Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the UFF UCF podcast. This is our June podcast, which we hope to launch on June 1st. And I, Robert Casanello, president of UFF UCF, is sitting in our studios with Jonathan Beaver, our treasurer, but not only our treasurer, but our resident expert on ethics. And he wanted to have a conversation with the ethics of the fall return. So, Jonathan, if you don't mind, can you give us an overview on why a conversation with the ethics of the fall return would be appropriate and productive?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. It's good to be here. When I think about ethics, I think about tensions often, and those tensions in this case are between individual rights and responsibilities and collective rights and responsibilities. And every ethics game we play, institutionally and organizationally, is a balancing act between those two things. And for me, COVID-19 has been, since the start of the pandemic, a really interesting case study or example of that tension specifically. And now with university policy to push us back to quote unquote normalcy in the fall, I think we're really bringing that conversation to a head. And I think it's an important one for us to have as a community.
Okay, Jonathan, so a lot of this and a lot of the conversation I think we're going to have is based upon your personal expertise as a scholar. Can you just summarize that for our audience?
Yeah, my research expertise in ethics as a philosopher has been focused for several years now on intersections in bioethics and public health ethics. So if bioethics focuses on sort of fundamentally patient-physician relationships, one-on-one relationships, public health ethics has started to question the place of collective thinking or thinking about the health of groups of people or populations. And so public health strategies are different than bioethical strategies for dealing with health issues, including the pandemic.
So the thing with our union, obviously, is our union is a collective body, right? And the reason we have a union, the purpose of a union, is for us to be able to speak, respond, and act collectively, not individually, because obviously that is tactically best for promoting the rights of people in the workplace, rather than negotiating those individually, if you believe in a union in that way. So, I mean, how does that help us think about health outcomes and health values in the way you're trying to bring attention to the fall return?
Well, I think it's a really interesting analogy when we think about the collective nature of unions or organizations in general, and then this fall return push, which really puts all the health onus on the individual, right? So the policy, as I understand it, for our UCF fall return is that I, as an individual, faculty member, student, employee, stakeholder, can wear a mask on campus and I can get vaccinated and I have the opportunity to do that, and nobody's going to infringe on my right to do that. But there's no responsibility at the collective to sort of protect one another. And I think that's a really fascinating problem. And it's not that the university, UCF as an entity, is all in on individual rights and all out on collective responsibility. I think they're playing the balancing act too. But there's a tension between the way that I see the unions work, which is individual working towards collective goods, and this institutional rollout, which is individuals working on individual health. And I think we could have a longer conversation about, whether the university should be thinking about collective public health.
Well, how would that look? I mean, how would thinking about collective public health look, in this environment, in this place we are?
Yeah, so I heard a really interesting thing on the radio yesterday, and it was that, Americans are going to have a trouble coming up in the next few months traveling internationally because as a group, as a country, we're not requiring so-called vaccine passports, as for instance, and other countries are. And the reason for a vaccine passport is to demonstrate to your colleagues, to your community, that yes, I'm not at risk of transmitting this disease to you, this virus. Now, we're not doing that at UCF, right? We're not, other institutions,
Well, the whole state of Florida is not, right?
Yeah, well, and this is the rub, I think, right? We're stuck in a political climate, and we have to follow state mandates, state rules, I think, as I understand it. But of course, there's lots of good examples across the country of institutions of higher education that say are requiring proof of vaccination for student return on campus and are upholding mask mandates still in the fall. So I think the difference and thinking about the values that are driving those differences is a really important piece of the conversation. And I don't want to come down hard on anybody and say like one is right and one is wrong necessarily, but I do worry about who we're putting at risk and why.
So who we're putting at risk, I mean, one of the things I think you've been impressing upon me, and certainly many of our folks in the bargaining unit who have emailed me or contacted me about their concerns in the fall return, is really about their children, their loved ones, and their family members who live at home, putting them at risk. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, this strikes close to home for me because I really worry that, so here at my home, from where I'm working right now, I've got 2 young kids at home. You might hear them in the background occasionally. But my 2 young children at home can't yet be vaccinated. And as far as I know, the earliest they might be able to get vaccinated would be early fall, September, October, in that timeline, but certainly not any sooner than that. So that means I am vaccinated and my family members are vaccinated. And let's assume everybody that I interact with on campus is vaccinated. Then my children aren't at risk. But that would only work if we were upholding a vaccine mandate or a mask mandate on campus. So if I'm required to go back to campus, say to interact with students face-to-face or colleagues face-to-face, and some of my colleagues or students aren't vaccinated or might be carrying the virus, there's a risk that I could bring that home to my children. And there are a lot of unknowns here. There's not empirical evidence right now to support the idea that vaccinated individuals can't carry and transmit the virus. And until we have that evidence, there's a pretty big public health worry that vaccinated individuals might be able to transmit the virus to unvaccinated individuals. So to make it more personal, there's a chance that I could go to campus taking care of myself, focused on the individual, and still transmit COVID-19 to my children at home.
So recently in the news, we've seen stories about I think several members of the New York Yankees being asymptomatic, yet they were all vaccinated, as well as recently, I believe, Bill Maher, the entertainer, as HBO show, he had to have a 2-week hiatus because even though he was vaccinated, he was asymptomatic. And so I think this is what you're kind of referring to, right? You could be vaccinated, yet you could carry the virus asymptomatically and then infect others.
Yeah, and we just don't know, right? The vaccines there's several of them now, and they're still quite new, and so we just don't have enough public health evidence, empirical evidence, to determine the extent of that risk. And maybe the risk is low. So I think about hypotheticals a lot, especially when I'm doing ethics and thinking about case studies. But so imagine that risk is incredibly low, right? That there's a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance even that an UCF employee can asymptomatically carry the virus, even if they're vaccinated, and then transmit it to someone. Even if that risk is really low, imagine if it was your kid. You are the 1 in 1,000 and your child gets sick because the university has decided that we're going to return to normal. And I get the pressures. I understand the state pressures. I understand the politics behind decisions and the economics. And yet the risk just seems so substantial to me that I have a hard time understanding the decision. And so again, I think thinking about the values at stake, maybe it's economic versus individual health, or maybe it's public health versus individual health. But those value conversations are really what should drive the way we're thinking about the return to campus in the fall.
So we're going to leave it here. And what conclusion comments, or what do you want to leave our audience with to think about as they are contemplating and preparing for the fall?
As I think about ethics generally, sort of as a theorist and as a scholar, and as a citizen, I tend to think in terms of relationships. So I understand the importance of individual rights and responsibilities, but my individuality is linked up to my communities, to my family, to UCF as an institution, to my colleagues and friends and neighbors. And so when I think about my decisions, I think about them in those relational contexts. And I think if everybody did that, we'd end up in a good place, no matter what the institution decides on policy.
So just do the right thing in the madness, is what you're saying,
And,
right?
yeah, that's right. And the right thing in this case is to think about continually think about how your actions and my actions are going to impact other people around us. Yeah. So if I'm not required to wear a mask on campus, perhaps I choose to wear a mask on campus, not for my own health necessarily, but for the health of those around me.
Okay, excellent. That's a great way to end this podcast. Jonathan, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Robert. It's great to talk.